Something is wrong with the world. You can feel it even now, in this quiet moment, in the strange liminal space between waking and sleep where you currently exist. The world outside your window, or beyond your walls, or across whatever distance separates you from it tonight, that world is broken. It was broken before you arrived in it, cracked along invisible fault lines by forces far older and far larger than anyone you will ever meet. And there is a golden light in the distance that promises to fix it. A warm, brilliant, honeyed glow that stretches upward into the sky like a column of pure grace. Visible from every corner of the world it dominates. A tree. An impossible tree. A tree that is not really a tree at all, but something older. Something that came down from the stars with an agenda. That is the first thing you should know about the lands between. The golden light lies. Welcome back to Nightfall Lore. Tonight, we are descending into one of the most vast, layered, and hauntingly beautiful stories ever assembled in a video game. The complete lore of Elden Ring, the 2022 masterpiece developed by From Software and co-created by the legendary Hidetaka Miyazaki and the architect of Westeros himself, George R.R. Martin. What Martin built was the deep mythology, the primordial bones of a world, the ancient wars, the lineages, the catastrophic events that left their mark on a shattered landscape. What Miyazaki built was everything on top of that architecture. The cryptic item descriptions, the environmental storytelling, the fragmented dialogue, the cosmic dread. Together they created something extraordinary. A world where every ruined wall has a name, every corpse has a history, every golden grace light pointing you forward is also in some sense a leash. Wherever you are tonight, tucked into the darkness of your bedroom, or resting on a couch, or lying with earbuds in and eyes already half closed, you are welcome here. This story is long because it deserves to be long. It is told in layers because it was made in layers. You do not need to follow every thread. You do not need to catch every detail. Let the story wash over you. Let the words carry you. If you drift away to sleep, that is a perfect outcome. If you find yourself wide awake and hungry for more, I will still be here, chapter by chapter, guiding you through a world of golden order, demigod blood, ancient conspiracies, and the terrifying cold light of distant stars. Take a slow breath, and let me tell you about a place called the Lands Between. Long before the Erd Tree spread its golden canopy across the sky, long before Queen Marika whispered the name of a new order into the ears of a waiting world, long before any of the wars, the demigods, the assassinations, the shattering, the hunting by torch and blade through fog-drenched ruins, before all of that, there was something else. Something older and stranger and in many ways more honest. There was the Crucible. The Crucible is one of Elden Ring's most quietly important concepts, and it is easy to miss it entirely if you race through the story without stopping to read the dusty incantation descriptions, or linger in the crumbling architecture of places that predate the Golden Order by ages. The Crucible is described in those item descriptions as the primordial force of the Erd Tree's energy, the source from which all life in the Lands Between originally came. But to call it a precursor to the Erd Tree is almost to flatter the Erd Tree too much, because the Crucible was not the Erd Tree. It was something different, something wilder, something less ordered. The Crucible was a melting pot in the most literal and profound sense, a primordial convergence of all living things, blended together in a single churning source of life energy. In this ancient age, life did not come in neat categories. It was not yet sorted into species and races and hierarchies. All of it existed in a kind of gorgeous, chaotic communion. The spells that reference the Crucible, the aspects of the Crucible incantations tell us this directly. They describe the primal force of the Erdtree's energy as the Primordial Crucible, in which all life was once blended together. When you cast those incantations, you sprout a tail, or wings, or an armoured carapace. You briefly manifest the physical traits of creatures that, in the age of the Golden Order, would be considered monstrous, deformities, signs of impurity. But in the Crucible's age, they were simply life expressing itself freely. And at the centre of this Crucible was a tree. Not the Erdtree as we know it, but an older tree, the Great Tree. You will find references to it scattered across the lands between like old photographs in a house that has been renovated and repainted and changed so many times that you can barely tell what it once looked like. The root resin item mentions it. The Crucible Knight armor set references it. These knights, those massive, ancient warriors who patrol certain dungeons and catacomb depths, are perhaps the Lands Between's oldest existing warriors. They served under Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, yes, but their design, their incantations, their whole aesthetic points backward to a time before the Golden Order. They were already ancient when the Golden Order was young. Who else lived in this primordial world? The ancient dragons, for one. These were not minor creatures. Before Marika and the Greater Will arrived to rearrange everything, dragons may have had an arrangement with the cosmic powers of the world. Dragon Lord Placidusax is perhaps the most extraordinary evidence of this. A massive, multi-headed creature that sits curled in a pocket of time, so ancient it predates the Erdtree. A being that was once, according to what we can piece together, the Elden Lord of a previous age, one that had its own god, its own order, its own structure, all of which was swept away when the Greater Will arrived with new instructions and a new tree. Placidusax's arena is one of the most visually stunning locations in the entire game, and one of the most conceptually staggering. You reach it through a falling platforming sequence in crumbling Farum Azula, itself a land suspended in time, held in a perpetual state of temporal ruin by forces we do not fully understand. You descend, and there in a vast open sky, lying curled around a space that seems to be the memory of something, is this enormous creature with two heads, where once there may have been more. The game refers to him as a god who lost his god, a dragon lord who served a deity that preceded the Greater Will and was apparently abandoned when that deity vanished. Placidusax waits for a god that will never return. He has been waiting in this pocket of stopped time for longer than the Erdtree has existed. When you fight him, he fights with an almost sorrowful grace, as if the combat itself is something he has been practicing in anticipation of a reunion that kept not arriving. When he dies, it carries the particular heaviness of something ancient and patient finally being released from its vigil. The dragons were powerful enough in the pre-Erdtree age that Marika's Golden Order had to come to an accommodation with at least some of them rather than simply conquering them. The Dragon Communion, the ritual practice of consuming dragon hearts and gaining draconic power, is ancient, and the Dragon Lord Communion practices you can engage in suggest that the relationship between humans and ancient dragons was far more complex than simple predator-prey dynamics. Some dragons chose to align with Marika's forces. Some, like Fortisax, formed genuine bonds of friendship with specific demigods. In Fortisax's case, that bond was with Godwyn the Golden. When Godwyn was murdered on the Night of Black Knives, Fortisax descended into the underground where Godwyn's body was festering and fought desperately to protect his friend, to drag him back from what was happening to him, to resist the spread of the Deathblight with pure draconic power. He failed. He is still there, locked in that futile battle, a dragon fighting forever against a death that will not take the proper form. The giants lived here too. The fire giants. Massive, one-eyed beings who worshipped a fell deity associated with flame, a primitive and terrifying fire god who predated Marika's golden civilization entirely. They lived in the mountaintops of the giants, those frozen ancient heights at the world's crown, and they tended a great flame that was not golden but red, a flame of ruin, a flame that could, if unleashed, burn the Erdtree to ash. This is why Marika would eventually direct Godfrey to wage war against them. They represented an older power that her new order could not tolerate sharing the world with. There were also the Nox, sometimes called the people of the Eternal Cities. These were builders and scholars and stargazers who constructed subterranean metropolises underground, in carved-out caverns lit by artificial stars. They were punished at some point for a rebellion against the greater will. Their cities were literally thrust underground, hidden away, buried as if in shame. And yet in those buried cities they continued their work, continued their studies, continued looking up at manufactured constellations and dreaming of real ones. The Eternal Cities are among the most haunting locations in Elden Ring precisely because they speak of a civilization punished for ambition, condemned to flourish in secret. The Misbegotten lived here, strong, winged beings who would eventually be enslaved under the Golden Order. The Omens lived here, beings born bearing the physical traits of the old Crucible, horns and strange growths that the Golden Order would later declare signs of corruption. All of these peoples, all of these creatures, all of these civilizations existed in a world that had its own logic, its own rhythms, its own relationship to life and death and the land. And then the stars changed. Something came from very far away, not from within the lands between, but from beyond it, from the lightless void between the stars themselves. A presence that would eventually be called the Greater Will sent two things toward this world. A daughter, Meta, who would become the Mother of Fingers, and a golden creature called the Elden Beast, which was, in the deepest possible sense, the living embodiment of order itself. The Greater Will had found a world worth shaping, and it began to reshape it. The Elden Beast settled into the world. Its essence became the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring, that golden circle that spins behind the title screen, that object so important it names the entire game, was not built by anyone. It was not forged. It was a cosmic entity, a living expression of cosmic law given form, and around it, over time, the Erdtree grew. The old great tree was absorbed, consumed, subsumed by this new growth, this golden parasite that now towered over everything and glowed with a warmth that promised grace and order and eternal life. The protection of the Erdtree incantation states it plainly, in that quiet way Elden Ring has of revealing horror in beautiful language. In the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erdtree. But through countless victories in war, it became the embodiment of order. Countless victories in war. Remember that phrase. because the golden glow of the Erdtree was purchased in blood, and not just the blood of monsters, but the blood of peoples and civilizations and gods who were already here when it arrived. The greater will did not come to the lands between and ask politely. It came with power and with purpose, and it pressed both against the world until the world yielded. What you see, when you explore the lands between, the ruins of eternal cities thrust underground, the last fire giant chained and burning at the top of the world, the enslaved misbegotten, the shunned omens, all of this is the visible residue of that conquest. A conquest so thorough and so ancient that most of its victims no longer remember being conquered. They simply know that they are at the bottom, and that the light above them is golden. There is a woman at the centre of everything. She is imprisoned now, shattered and suspended in silence inside the very tree that represents her power. You find her there at the end, when you have fought your way through every demigod and broken soldier and monstrous remnant of a war that she started. She is cracked open, fractured, held together by golden thorns, and she does not speak. But everything in the world speaks about her. Every ruined city, every dead demigod, they are all speaking about Marika. Because Marika is the hinge of this story. She is the axis around which everything turns. Queen Marika the Eternal. She was not always eternal. She was not always a queen. Before the title, before the godhood, before the Erdtree claimed her as its vessel, she was a Numen, a woman from a people who, according to the character creation screen, came from somewhere outside the lands between. The Numen are a rare, striking people with unusual constitutions. They were in some ways already special before the Greater Will found Marika among them. But what made Marika extraordinary was that the Greater Will's emissaries, the Two Fingers, chose her as an Empyrean, a candidate for divinity, a mortal who could be elevated to godhood and serve as the vessel for the Elden Ring. To understand what this means, you need to understand the Two Fingers. These are the Greater Will's agents in the world, disembodied hands, each with exactly two enormous fingers which communicate in a sign language that only specially trained finger readers can interpret. They selected Empyreans throughout history, candidates who might become the god of a new age, who might bear the Elden Ring and maintain the Golden Order on behalf of the distant cosmic Greater Will. Marika was one of those candidates, and she accepted. She became a god at a place called the Gate of Divinity, in a location known as Enir Ilim, the very same place that Miquella would later attempt to use to claim his own godhood in the events of the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion. The ritual required a lord, a consort, someone to stand beside the ascending god as a paired power. Marika's first consort was a warrior from the Badlands named Huaralu, whom history would come to call Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. But we will come to him properly in the next chapter. What matters here is what Marika did with her godhood. She did not simply accept it and maintain the status quo. She built something. She constructed the Golden Order, a system of divine law, a theology, an entire metaphysics of reality based on the Elden Ring's runes. And the most significant thing she did, early on, was remove the rune of death from the Elden Ring. Sit with that for a moment. She removed death. The rune of death was one of the fundamental runes composing the Elden Ring, one of the basic laws governing reality in the lands between. By extracting it and sealing it away inside a creature called Malekith, her own shadow-bound beast, a being chained to her and made from the same essence. Marika changed what it meant to live and die in the lands between. Under the Golden Order, ordinary people no longer truly died. Their spirits returned to the Erd Tree through the underground catacombs. The Erd Tree sustained them, and in some cases could send them back. The Demigods, the great champions, the lords, they were effectively immortal in a far more dramatic sense. They could be killed in battle, but they could not permanently die. The cycle of souls flowed through the Erd Tree forever, feeding the tree, feeding the greater will, keeping the whole golden machine running. This was presented and largely understood as a gift. Immortality, grace, the promise that you would not simply cease to exist when your body gave out. And for most people, most of the time, it probably did function as a gift. The Age of Plenty that followed was exactly what it sounds like, an era of relative abundance, of grace distributed generously, of golden light shining over a world that had accepted the Erd Tree's dominance. Murals from this period depict the Erd Tree standing straight and tall, not leaning as it does in the present game, a subtle visual detail that suggests the tree was healthier and more vital in those earlier times. But Marika was not simply a passive vessel. She was a god, yes, but gods in Elden Ring are rarely what they appear to be. She made choices, she directed wars, she shaped the world according to her vision, which was not always simply the greater will's vision. There is evidence, scattered carefully across the game in item descriptions and cryptic NPC dialogue, that Marika had her own agenda, that she was not merely a puppet of the greater will, but a player in a long game of her own. One of the most staggering revelations in the entire game, delivered not in a cutscene or a dramatic speech, but in a boss encounter, is that Marika and Radagon are the same person. Radagon is Marika's second husband, her second Elden Lord consort, the man you fight as the penultimate boss of the game, that red-haired figure desperately trying to repair the shattered Elden Ring. Even as you destroy him, he is Marika. They share one body, two aspects of a single divine being, seemingly in conflict with each other. Marika the god, Radagon the devotee of the Golden Order, the woman who would ultimately shatter the Elden Ring, and the man who tried until his last breath to restore it. Both of them are the same person, and that contradiction runs through the entire story like a crack in gold. The implications of this are vast and strange. Consider what it means for Radagon's previous marriage to Rennala of the Full Moon. Radagon courted Rennala, defeated her sorcerers in battle, and then proposed peace through union. They married. They had children, Radahn, Ricard, and Ranni, and then Marika summoned Radagon back to the Erd Tree capital, back to become her second Elden Lord consort. The marriage to Rennala ended. The marriage to Marika began. Except Marika and Radagon are the same person, which means Marika in some sense courted Rennala, and Marika in some sense abandoned her, and the person who returned to the capital to marry Marika was already Marika. The theology of this is enough to make anyone's head swim, and the game does not attempt to fully resolve it. What it does instead is let the consequences ripple outward into the lives of every character who loved Radagon or Marika, and let you feel the weight of each ripple without ever quite explaining the physics. Rennala is still at Raya Lucaria when you reach her. She sits in the Grand Library surrounded by her disciples, clutching a small amber egg that she believes contains her beloved, speaking to it, cradling it, refusing to accept that the love of her life left her for someone who was, in the deepest, metaphysical sense, himself. She is not a villain. She's a woman who was abandoned and who found a way to survive the abandonment by refusing to fully acknowledge it. When you fight her, she fights back not with hatred, but with a kind of desperate magical creativity, conjuring strange creatures from the pages of books, rebuilding and trying again, the way someone who has been broken keeps trying to make something work that simply does not work anymore. She is one of the most sympathetic boss encounters in the game, and one of the most quietly devastating. Because of this strange singular identity, born of a single god, as the game puts it, the children Marika and Radagon had together were cursed from birth. The twin Empyreans, Miquella and Malenia, were born with incurable afflictions that no medicine, no magic, no power of the Golden Order could correct. Miquella was cursed with eternal youth. He could never grow up, never truly mature, forever trapped in the body of a beautiful child. Malenia was born harbouring the Scarlet Rot, a corruption so potent it would eventually consume her eyes, her arm, her leg, entire regions of her body. And these were Marika and Radagon's children, the children of a single god, the most powerful Empyreans in generations, born afflicted from the very first breath. What does it mean that the god of the Golden Order could not protect her own children from their curses? Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. There is something else that sits at the heart of Marika's story. Something that takes the entire game to understand and the entire game to feel the weight of. She knew. Whether she knew from the beginning, or whether she came to understand slowly over centuries of godhood, it seems increasingly clear that Marika understood the flaws of the system she had built. That the greater will was not benevolent but indifferent. That the Erdtree's gift of immortality was also a trap, a way of recycling souls back into the tree to feed a cosmic parasite. That the Golden Order she had built was not justice, but control, and at some point, perhaps driven by the death of her beloved son Godwyn, perhaps driven by something she had understood for centuries, she chose to break it. The shattering of the Elden Ring was not an accident, and it was not madness, though it looked like both. It was an act. A decision made by a god who had spent long enough maintaining a system she no longer believed in. Before there was a Tarnished, there was a warrior. His name was Huarlu, and he came from the Badlands, the harsh, brutal frontier beyond the lands between proper, a place of raw strength and constant violence, where survival was the only virtue that mattered. Huarlu was a chieftain of his people, a fighter of extraordinary power, a man so consumed by the lust for battle that he carried it like a disease, like a flame that burned everything around him, including himself. He was, in every possible sense, the opposite of the refined and ordered world that the greater will envisioned for the lands between. And Marika chose him. She chose this wild, violent man from the edge of the world to be her consort, her husband, her first Elden Lord. Why? Because he was the best warrior in the world. Because to forge the Golden Order, to conquer the peoples and civilizations that resisted the coming of the Erdtree, she needed someone who could win wars. And Huarlu could win anything, but he could not remain Huarlu. To serve as Elden Lord, to stand beside a god and govern a civilization, required a transformation, a suppression of the violent nature that made him useful in war but dangerous in peace. To help him achieve this transformation, Huaralu took something remarkable upon his back, a golden lion spirit called Serosh, the Beast Regent. Serosh was not merely a decorative companion or a symbol of power, he was a living restraint, a counselor who lived on Huaralu's shoulders, literally and figuratively, and whose presence helped suppress the ceaseless lust for battle that raged within his host. By accepting Serosh, Huaralu became Godfrey, first Elden Lord. He changed his name, his title, his very manner, and he got to work. The wars Godfrey fought on Marika's behalf were extraordinary in their scope and brutality. He fought the ancient dragons and made peace with some of them. He fought the storms, confronting the Stormlord in single combat and defeating him, a feat so superhuman it still reverberates through the architecture of Stormvale Castle, where echoes of that battle exist in every carved relief and every howling wind. Most significantly, he led the campaign against the Fire Giants. The war against the Fire Giants was perhaps the defining campaign of the early Golden Order, the great act of conquest that broke the last major organised resistance to Marika's vision. The Giants, with their fell god and their flame of ruin, represented an existential threat to the Erdtree. Godfrey and his armies fought their way up to the mountaintops of the Giants and annihilated them. Nearly all of them. One was left alive, chained with that great cauldron of flame, kept alive to tend the fire that would eventually be needed for the Erdtree to open, a grim utility to spare one survivor of a genocide because you might need them later. Through all of this, Godfrey was a husband to Marika, and a father to children who became demigods. His eldest son from Marika was Godwyn the Golden, a young man of such obvious grace and nobility that he was loved by nearly everyone in the lands between, a figure whose death would become the fracture point around which the entire story pivots. He also had two sons who were hidden away at birth, Morgott and Mog, twin omens, born bearing the growths and deformities of the old Crucible that the Golden Order had declared corrupt. Marika and Godfrey could not acknowledge them publicly. They were sealed in the sewers beneath Lendel, the royal capital, hidden from a world that judged their existence as shameful. Morgott would eventually escape and dedicate his life to protecting the city that reviled him. Mog would also escape, but in a very different direction. The war against the Giants deserves particular attention because it is both a war of conquest and an act of the strangest cruelty. The Fire Giants were ancient. They had tended their flame since before the Erdtree existed, serving a fell god of fire who predated Marika's golden civilization by ages. Their flame, the flame of ruin, was genuinely dangerous to the Erdtree, a force capable of burning the divine tree to nothing if unleashed. From the Golden Order's perspective, the Giants had to be neutralized. From a more impartial perspective, the Golden Order destroyed an entire people for the crime of having a fire that could threaten their preferred tree. Godfrey's armies fought the Giants for a long time and with tremendous violence. When the war was finally won, when nearly every giant had been killed and the last survivor had been brought to the mountaintops in chains, the Golden Order had demonstrated something important, that no culture, no deity, no civilization that predated the Erdtree's arrival could be allowed to continue in a form that might challenge it. The last fire giant was not killed, he was chained. His purpose, to keep the giant's forge burning, to keep the flame of his destroyed people alive in a cauldron, so that when the time came, when a Tarnished needed to burn the thorns from the Erdtree's door, the flame would still be there, a survivor of a genocide kept alive as a utility. That is the Golden Order's relationship to the peoples it conquered in its purest, most honest form. And then Godfrey's purpose ran out. This is one of the strangest and most tragic elements of his story. When the last worthy enemy fell to his axe, when the wars were won and the Golden Order was established and there was nothing left to conquer, Godfrey's spirit simply sank. Without war, without purpose, without the fire of battle that had defined his entire existence, he became something less. The flame in him dimmed, and Marika, who understood this, who may have planned for it, stripped him of his grace. She took from him the golden light that connected him to the Erdtree and to the Divine Order. She marked him as Tarnished. He was the first Tarnished. And with him, the armies that had won all those wars, his kinfolk, his fellow warriors, the entire force that had built the Golden Order through conquest, were also stripped of their grace. They were given a cruel and extraordinary promise by Marika as they were forced to leave. She told them to cross the sea of fog, to go to the Badlands, to fight and die, and continue fighting even beyond death. And she promised that after their deaths she would return their grace to them, that they would come back to the lands between and have another chance to serve as Elden Lord. This promise, this strange, long-deferred promise made to a generation of exiles, is the engine of the game. The Tarnished are those warriors, or their descendants, or those who later lost their own grace and were caught in the same cycle. They have all received the call. The grace has returned, like a faint golden thread leading them home, back to the lands between, back toward the tree that once rejected them. What did it mean to be tarnished in the interval between exile and return? It meant wandering without purpose, without the warmth of grace, through lands that were harder and more dangerous than the blessed realm of the Erdtree. It meant dying, because grace does not make you unkillable. It only brings you back. Tarnished can die 100 times and return 100 times, which sounds like a gift and feels, in practice, like a particular kind of exhaustion. The world beyond the lands between is called the Badlands, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Harsh, without mercy, shaped by the simple and brutal logic of survival rather than the golden aspirations of a divine order. Those exiles wandered there for so long that some of their descendants never knew the lands between at all. The call of grace found them in the Badlands generations later, in bodies that had no direct memory of what was being promised but responded to the promise anyway, like an instinct buried beneath the rational mind, that pull toward home, toward a place you have never been but that exists in your bones as a kind of memory. That is the emotional undertone of the player's journey. You are going somewhere you have a right to be and have never been. You are claiming something that belongs to you and that you do not fully understand yet. Godfrey himself, stripped of his title, divested himself of his remaining symbols of lordship and became again what he had always really been, Huaralu, warrior. He left the lands between and wandered, seeking battle wherever he could find it, fighting for the pure pleasure of fighting, for the sensation of being tested, and he waited for the day Marika's promise would be fulfilled, waited longer than any human lifespan should allow, waited perhaps out of something like faith, or perhaps something harder than faith, something more like stubbornness, like the refusal to accept that you have already reached the end of your story, He comes back eventually. You will meet him near the end of the game, and when you do, there is a moment of extraordinary power. Mid-battle, he reaches up and seizes the spirit of Searush, the Beast Regent, the golden lion who has restrained him for all of this impossibly long time, and he tears him off, thanks him, kills him, and becomes Huaralu again, unrestrained, primal, howling with a joy that sounds almost like grief. That moment is the story of the Golden Order in miniature. What was contained always wanted to be free, and freedom in the lands between always comes with blood. By the time the events of Elden Ring begin, Marika and Radagon have produced a considerable family, and between Marika's first marriage to Godfrey and Radagon's previous marriage to another figure, the Demigod family tree is tangled, strange, and saturated with tragedy in the way that only the families of gods seem capable of achieving. Godfrey's children by Marika were 3, Godwyn, Morgott, and Molg. Godwyn the Golden is the most beloved, a young man who seemed to embody the ideals of the Golden Order in human form. He was noble without being cold, strong without being cruel, graced with a warmth that made people genuinely love him, rather than merely serve him. He formed a famous friendship with the ancient dragon Fortisax, a bond so unusual and so genuine that it exists as one of the game's most moving side stories. He was the firstborn son of the first Elden Lord and the Eternal Queen, and everyone who met him seemed to agree that he was something genuinely rare, a good person in an impossible world, and of course, he was the first to die. Radagon's previous marriage was to Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, the great scholar-magician who ruled Raya Lucaria Academy, the school of glintstone sorcery nestled in the lakes of Liurnia. Their union was a political alliance between the Golden Order and the Carian royal family, the sorcerers who had long resisted the Erdtree's dominance and maintained their own traditions. Radagon and Rennala had 3 children together, Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni. These were brilliant, powerful, deeply individual people who would each, in their own way, deviate dramatically from the path their parents had set. Radahn is perhaps the most physically impressive of all the demigods, a massive lion-armoured general who studied gravitational magic in Celia so that he could continue riding his beloved horse Leonard without the animal being crushed by his enormous weight. This detail, a demigod warrior learning an entire branch of cosmic magic not for conquest or glory, but because he did not want to hurt his small horse, tells you more about Radahn than any battle record could. He was also the demigod who halted the stars, using his gravity magic to fight against the movement of fate itself. He locked the constellations in place, preventing a destiny he could not accept. We will understand why, eventually. Rykard became the Lord of Blasphemy, a being who merged with a great serpent god and spoke of consuming gods and swallowing the Golden Order from within. His manor in the volcano became a gathering place for those who rejected the Greater Will's authority. Assassins, rebels, the disillusioned, the furious, and Ranni. Ranni the witch, the lunar princess, who would renounce her flesh and transfer her soul into a porcelain doll and become arguably the most consequential figure in the entire story. Her plan began on a cold and foggy night that the game calls the Night of Black Knives, but we will reach that night in the next chapter. Marika and Radagon's own children, the twin prodigies Miquella and Malenia, were the most powerful Empyreans of their generation, and the most afflicted. Miquella's curse of eternal youth and Malenia's curse of scarlet rot have already been introduced. What matters here is the character of each sibling, their relationship to each other, and what they built in response to a world that had delivered them this particular set of circumstances. Miquella was something extraordinarily rare in the lands between. He was genuinely kind, not as a performance, not as a political strategy, but as a deep orientation of his character. He envisioned a world without discrimination, a world where those rejected by the Golden Order, the Albinorics, the misbegotten, the omens, the lost and the cursed, would be welcomed and protected. He developed his own theology of unalloyed gold, a form of divine power independent of the greater will, and used it to build the Haligtree, a great tree watered with his own blood, grown as a sanctuary for the world's unwanted. He could not cure Malenia's rot, but he gave her a needle made of unalloyed gold that suppressed it. He could not cure his own eternal youth, but he worked toward a future where both of them might find peace. He was also, we learn later in Shadow of the Erdtree, a manipulator of extraordinary subtlety. His kindness was real, his compassion was genuine, and his ability to compel affection from others, a supernatural charm that worked even on demigods, was a power he used without apology, because he believed in the destination even when the path required him to bend people toward it. Malenia, by contrast, is more warrior than schemer. She's the blade of Miquella, his sworn protector, his enforcer and champion. She never lost a battle, never, according to every piece of lore associated with her, until the last one. Her will was iron, her dignity was absolute, her devotion to Miquella was total, and beneath all of that stoic martial perfection, the scarlet rot waited, patient as a disease, ready to consume her the moment her needle broke. There were other demigods too. Godric the Grafted, a weak descendant of Godfrey's line who compensated for his own inadequacy by surgically attaching the limbs of conquered warriors to his body. A grotesque and pathetic monument to insecurity wearing the stolen strength of better people. Morgott, the Omen King, who had dedicated his entire existence to protecting Leyndell despite the city having spent his entire life treating him as a monster. Mohg, the Lord of Blood, who descended into the worship of an outer god called the Formless Mother and built his dynasty of blood devotion in a hidden palace built around a wound in the earth. These were the children of the Golden Order, not golden themselves, not ordered, complicated and cursed and brilliant and broken in ways that said something uncomfortable about what kind of world their parents had built. On a night of wintry fog, the world changed. This is how the story refers to it in the opening narration of the game itself. On a night of wintry fog, the rune of death was stolen, and the demigods began to fall, starting with Godwyn the Golden. The Night of Black Knives is the pivot point of the entire Elden Ring narrative, the moment before which one world existed, and after which a different, darker world took its place. Everything that came after, every war and every betrayal, and every act of desperate ambition, traces a line back to this single cold night. What happened, precisely, is this. Someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith. Recall that Malekith was Marika's shadowbound beast, the creature in whom she had sealed the Rune of Death when she removed it from the Elden Ring. He guarded this forbidden power, this locked-away fundamental law of mortality, with absolute dedication. He was chained to it. He was made from it. And on this particular night, before the fires of any guard had a chance to react, a piece of that rune was taken. The thief was Ranni the Witch. She has admitted this herself directly in her questline. I stole a fragment of the Rune of Death, she tells you, and used it to forge the god-slaying Black Knives through fearsome rite. The Black Knife Assassins were an elite group of women, all of them new men, all of them with mysterious ties to Marika herself, who dressed in armour of silver under cloaks that rendered them nearly invisible. They were given knives imbued with death power, and on that particular night they moved through the sleeping capital of Lendel and did what god-slaying knives were designed to do. They killed Godwyn the Golden. They carved a curse mark of death into his flesh, a mark that should have taken the shape of a complete circle, representing the full death of both body and soul. But something unexpected happened at the precise moment of Godwyn's death. Somewhere across the lands, between, atop a high and isolated tower, another demigod knelt and took her own life. Ranni. In the same instant that Godwyn died, she killed herself, and this split the curse mark. Instead of a complete circle, it became two halves, two half wheels, as the game describes them, one half carved into Godwyn's flesh, one half carried by Ranni's now discarded body. What this meant in practice was a horror that no one had anticipated. Godwyn did not die completely. The knife that killed him carried a fragment of the Rune of Death, not the whole thing. Only the rune piece that kills souls, as it turned out, killed only his soul. His body remained, alive but soulless, growing and changing and festering in those underground roots beneath Lendel. His corrupted flesh spreading through the earth in tendrils and growths, becoming something the game calls the Prince of Death. Not dead, not living, not anything that the Golden Order had prepared a language for. And Ranni? Her body died, but her soul survived. She had planned for this. She transferred her soul into a small doll, modelled after a mentor she had loved, and she vanished from the world's awareness. The first demigod to die in the flesh, but the one whose soul kept moving, kept planning, kept working toward a future she had already imagined in precise detail. Why did she do it? Ranni tells you in her long quest line that she wanted to escape the fate the Two Fingers had chosen for her. She was an Empyrean, a candidate to become the next god of the lands between, and that meant she was expected to serve the greater will, to take Marika's place and continue the cycle of divine control that Marika herself had come to resent. Ranni did not want to be the greater will's instrument. She wanted to forge her own path, to follow a different cosmic force. The dark moon, a colder and more distant light than the golden Erd tree, something that offered freedom rather than order. To free herself from the Two Fingers, control, she needed to die in the flesh while preserving her soul. The Knight of Black Knives gave her the means. The stolen Rune of Death, imbued in those knives, was the mechanism of her escape. But the consequences rippled outward in ways even she had not fully planned for. Godwyn's death, the first death of a demigod in all of history, shattered something fundamental in the world's equilibrium. The Rune of Death, however fragmentary, had re-entered the world. Its traces spread through the underground root network of the Erd tree, appearing as Deathroot, spawning a new category of being called those who live in death. People who could not properly return to the Erd tree who existed in a wrongful undead state that violated the Golden Order's entire framework of mortality. And these people were hunted by the Golden Order for simply existing, for being the living consequence of what the Knight of Black Knives had done. Most significantly of all, the death of Godwyn destroyed Queen Marika. Godwyn was beloved. Godwyn was the symbol of everything Marika had hoped the Golden Order could produce. Grace made flesh, nobility without corruption, light that actually delivered what it promised. And he was gone, his body festering in the roots of the tree, his soul gone forever. And the person who had done this, who had used a stolen piece of the system Marika herself had built to murder her firstborn son, was her stepdaughter, her own extended family. Whether out of grief or out of a decision that had been building for centuries and needed only this final, unbearable weight to complete it, or out of some plan we have not yet fully understood, Marika took the Elden Ring and she struck it. She shattered it. The fundamental laws of reality in the lands between cracked and broke, and the great shards of the ring flew outward to every corner of the world, and each shard settled in or near a demigod, becoming their great rune. And the demigods, touched by this concentrated power, were driven, every single one of them, to the edge of madness. The shattering had begun. Before we continue into the chaos of the shattering, I want to take a quiet moment, in the spirit of this late hour, to say thank you. Thank you for spending tonight with this story and with this channel. If Nightfall lore has given you a good night's rest before, if these deep lore journeys have carried you gently into sleep, then I would be so grateful if you would take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It helps more than you know, and it tells me that these long, careful, immersive storytelling nights mean something to you. And if there is a game, a world, a lore you want to hear next, leave it in the comments. I read all of them. Now let us go back to the lands between. The demigods have inherited their shards, and the wars are about to begin. In the wake of the shattering, the world unmade itself in slow motion. The great runes distributed themselves among the demigods, enormous concentrated fragments of Elden Ring power that amplified everything already present in their bearer: strength, ambition, brilliance, madness. The game is careful to tell us that the power of the great runes was a mad taint, not merely a gift. It pushed each demigod further in the direction they were already going, which in every case was already some distance past the edge of what was reasonable. Godric the Grafted inherited a great rune, and retreated to Stormvale Castle, surrounding himself with loyal soldiers and beginning the grotesque project of grafting extra limbs to his body. Each limb belonged to someone he had conquered. He became a patchwork monument to his own inadequacy, wearing the strength of others because he had never found enough of his own. You fight him early in the game, before you fully understand the scope of what is happening, and even then there is something deeply sad about him. This scared small man wearing a crown of stolen hands. Morgott the Omen King took the great rune of his lineage to Lindell, the royal capital, and placed himself on the Elden Throne not as Elden Lord but as something stranger. A guardian, a keeper. He who had been shunned and reviled by this city his entire life chose, when the city was in crisis, to protect it. He hid his true nature under cloaks and illusions, appearing as the merchant and prophet Margit in the outer world, warning Tarnished away from the capital, telling them to go back, telling them this world was not ready for them. He loved the Golden Order even as it had always despised him. It is one of the most poignant stories in the entire game. Ricard, Lord of Blasphemy, took his great rune to Volcano Manor and merged with a great serpent, becoming a god-devouring blasphemy that wanted to consume the entire hierarchy that had built the world he hated. His manor became a place of refuge for assassins and recusants, people who rejected the Golden Order for personal reasons, who wanted to hunt the Tarnished rather than support them, who saw the return of Marika's exiled warriors as a threat rather than a salvation. And Radahn the Red Lion, the Star Scourge, the Conqueror of Gravity. He claimed his great rune and continued to hold the stars locked in place. He had been doing this for some time. He had halted the stars specifically to prevent a destiny from playing out. Ranni's destiny, as it turned out. Because Ranni's fate, the age of stars she intended to usher in, required the stars to fall, and Radahn had made it his personal mission to prevent them from doing so. Even after the Shattering, even as the world descended into war, he maintained the gravity chains he had wrapped around the sky. It is worth pausing on Radahn for a moment longer than the narrative strictly requires, because he is one of the game's most deeply characterized demigods and one of its greatest tragedies. He studied gravity magic in Celia, a town in Caelid full of sorcerers who had built their tradition on the study of stars and cosmic forces. He learned to manipulate gravitational fields not for military advantage, though he certainly gained that too, but because he had a horse he loved and did not want to crush. Leonard, a small, scrawny horse that Radahn had owned since childhood, that could not begin to support the weight of the enormous warrior Radahn was growing into, and that Radahn refused to give up. Every spell he mastered, every cosmic principle he bent to his will, was driven in part by the simple desire to keep riding his horse. When you fight Radahn, in that vast ruined desert north of Redmond Castle, he rides in on Leonard, even now, even feral and mindless and consumed by rot. Leonard carries him still, and when Radahn dies, Leonard stays beside the body. There is something in that detail, something about loyalty and constancy, and the endurance of small loves in the face of cosmic catastrophe. That is almost unbearable in its sweetness. The stars that Radahn held in place were not merely metaphorical. They carried destinies. When he fell, when you defeated him at the festival surrounded by NPCs who joined the fight in an attempt to give their beloved general an honourable death, the stars moved. A massive fragment of something hit the earth, opening a new underground city. Nokron, the eternal city previously inaccessible. Nokron's opening was specifically what Ranni needed for the next stage of her plan. Malenia marched her army south from the Haligtree to fight him, and the Battle of Aeonia, the defining conflict of the Shattering Gaia, was the result. Her Cleanrot knights, who had sworn loyalty to her knowing it would expose them to the Scarlet Rot, fought Radahn's soldiers in one of the bloodiest clashes in lands between history. The two great commanders met personally on the battlefield, and what followed was a duel of genuinely cosmic proportions. Neither could decisively defeat the other. Malenia had never lost. Radahn had never lost. They were perfectly, catastrophically matched, and then Malenia's needle broke. Whether it shattered from the violence of the battle or whether she chose to break it herself in a last desperate gamble, the lore is intentionally ambiguous on this point. The result was immediate and total. The scarlet rot that had been building inside her since birth, that her needle had suppressed for years, exploded outward in a bloom of terrible beauty. The Scarlet Aeonia, a massive crimson flower, vast as a small city, that erupted from Malenia's body and rained rot across the Eyelid wilds. When that bloom subsided, the entire region of Caelid had been transformed into the blood-red wasteland you encounter early in the game. The sky turned permanent crimson. The ground turned into festering swamp. The wildlife mutated or died. The very air became an affliction. Radahn survived, but only technically. The scarlet rot consumed his mind, eroding his vast intelligence and his hard-won dignity until what remained was a feral creature that wandered the ruined desert north of his castle, eating the corpses of friend and foe alike, a former star-conquering general reduced to mindless hunger. His loyal soldiers, who loved him deeply, could not bring themselves to simply end his misery. Instead, they organized what they called the Radahn Festival, an invitation sent out to warriors across the world to come to Caelid and fight their beloved general. Not to kill him for conquest, but to give him the honourable death in battle that he deserved. Malenia herself fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, her coma so profound that one of her Cleanrot knights, a woman named Finley, carried her unconscious body all the way back to the Halig Tree alone, fighting off enemies the entire journey, just one knight, carrying a sleeping goddess across a broken world. That is a story that gets 2 lines in an item description, and those 2 lines are more affecting than most games' entire narratives. When the Shattering ended, no victor had emerged. The Demigods retreated to their strongholds. Lendel was mostly intact, but without a true Elden Lord. The Erdtree could no longer clothe the world in its golden grace as it once had. The Greater Will had effectively gone silent, unable or unwilling to guide events that had spiraled so far beyond its intended design, and the world hung in a suspended moment of aftermath, ruined, fractured, waiting. Lendel itself deserves mention as one of the most astonishing locations in all of gaming, not merely because of its visual grandeur, but because of what it represents as a record of everything the lands between went through. The city is built around the Erdtree's roots, literally constructed on and around the massive golden roots that emerge from the earthen arch through the city like the bones of the world made visible. Grand cathedrals and ornate avenues wrap around these roots. The architecture is vast and confident, the aesthetic of a civilization that genuinely believed it would last forever. And it is frozen. By the time you walk its streets, the city has been sealed off from normal time, golden ash drifting through the air as if even the dust has been preserved. The people who remain are soldiers still at their posts, knights still loyal to an order that has not existed properly since the Shattering began. They have been waiting in that golden amber of suspended routine for so long that waiting has become their entire identity. They do not question, they do not grieve. They simply hold their positions because that is what they were made to do, and the alternative, acknowledging that the world they were built to protect no longer exists, is a truth that would unmake them entirely. The Erdtree itself, in the present of the game, cannot be entered. Its golden bark has closed over its interior, sealed by thorns that no conventional weapon or magic can break through. It is as if the tree has withdrawn from the world, retreated inward, become inaccessible to the very civilization that was supposed to be sustained by its grace. Sorcerers say the Erd tree is withered. Priests say it is merely dormant, waiting for a new Elden Lord to restore its vitality. Both groups might be partially right. What is certain is that the grace light that once poured from the tree now comes only in thin, faint threads. The sights of grace that guide the Tarnished forward, golden wisps barely visible in the air, remnants of a system running on its last reserves of divine energy. They were born together and have rarely been apart, and their stories are so deeply intertwined that to tell one is always, in some sense, to tell the other. But the paths they travelled after the Shattering diverged dramatically, and understanding where each of them ended up requires following both threads carefully. Malenia's trajectory after the Battle of Aeonia and her long sleep at the Halig Tree is, on the surface, a story of waiting. She sleeps in the depths of Elphael, the brace of the Halig Tree, and she waits for Miquella to return. Her clean-rut knights stand vigil. The Halig Tree, infected by the scarlet rot she brought back with her, begins to change and sicken, and she waits. But waiting is not the same as passivity, because Malenia's curse is active even in her sleep. The scarlet rot does not pause. It spreads. It transforms the Halig Tree in ways that Miquella had never intended when he grew it as a sanctuary. The pure, welcoming haven becomes tainted, monstrous, a place where the rot grows alongside the trees, and Malenia, asleep at its centre, is the source of that change. When you finally reach her in the game, after navigating the consecrated snowfield, finding the hidden path, climbing through the increasingly corrupted Halig Tree, she wakes up. Not because she senses a threat exactly, but because you disturb her, and what she says when she first speaks is one of the most quietly devastating lines in the game. She says, "I dreamt for so long. My flesh was dull gold and my blood was rot." And she pauses, and she says, "I await him still." She's waiting for Miquella. She fought his battle. She carried his cause. She lost her arm, her eye, her mobility, her entire relationship with her own body, all for the project Miquella had undertaken. And she is still waiting. Even now, even after everything, she introduces herself as Malenia, Blade of Miquella, and declares she has never known defeat. And she has not. Even you, this Tarnished who has fought through every demigod the lands between contains, will find her the hardest battle of all. She heals when she strikes you, stealing your vitality with each attack, an expression of how the scarlet rot sustains her, even as it consumes. She can bloom again in battle, manifesting a smaller scarlet Aeonia that fills the arena with rot. She is devastatingly beautiful, and devastatingly dangerous in equal measure, and the tragedy is that she did nothing wrong. She was born with a curse. She fought for her brother's vision, and she became what the curse always promised she would become, a goddess of rot who can never be at peace. Miquella's story, meanwhile, runs along a stranger and more duplicitous path than his reputation as the kindest of the demigods might suggest. Miquella is trapped in eternal youth. He will never grow into adulthood, never achieve the mature form that godhood requires. This is not merely a cosmetic curse. It is a fundamental barrier between who he is and what he needs to become. Because Miquella's goal, which comes into full focus in the shadow of the Erdtree expansion, is to become a god of compassion, An age of compassion to replace the age of the Golden Order, a new order free from the greater will's manipulation, governed by Miquella's own principles of welcome and acceptance. But to become a god, you need to grow up first. The Haligtree was his attempt to solve this. He grew it from a sapling, watering it with his own Empyrean blood, hoping that the tree would grow and that somehow his growth would be reflected in it. But the Haligtree never quite became an Erd tree. It never achieved the stature he needed. And then, while Malenia was away fighting Radahn, something happened that Miquella had, in fact, we now understand, orchestrated. Morg, Lord of Blood, consumed by devotion to his outer god, the formless mother, and secretly charmed by Miquella's supernatural ability to compel affection, broke into the Haligtree and kidnapped the sleeping Empyrean. He took him to his hidden palace in the underground, wrapped in a cocoon of golden silk, and began to feed him blood in a ritual designed to elevate Miquella to divine status. Mok believed he was a devoted caretaker, enabling a god's ascension, that Miquella would wake and recognize his service and make him a consort. In truth, Miquella had arranged all of this. He had charmed Mog. He had allowed himself to be taken, because Mog's blood rituals and Mog's palace gave Miquella access to something he needed, the realm of shadow. And in the realm of shadow lay the gate of divinity, the same gate Marika had used to become a god. Through death in Mog's cocoon, Miquella broke free of the Erdtree's cycle of death and rebirth, entered the realm of shadow in spirit, and shed his flesh piece by piece along the path, abandoning his cursed eternal youth, his golden flesh, his very limitations, his journey toward the gate. The plan was extraordinary. The execution was cold. The kindness that everyone perceived in Miquella was real. He genuinely wanted to make the world gentler, genuinely cared about those who suffered under the Golden Order. And the manipulation was also real. He charmed Mog, used him, let Malenia fight a battle that served his purposes, and move through others like pieces on a board, all while maintaining the aura of a child too innocent for such calculations. He is perhaps the most fascinatingly ambiguous figure in the entire game. The greater will is not alone in the cosmos. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about Elden Ring's theology. The cosmic forces at play are not a singular hierarchy, but a contested space, a war of influences that predates the lands between and will continue long after any single civilization within it has risen and fallen. The greater will dominates the current age through the Erd Tree and Marika's godhood, but other powers exist. Other voices speak through other vessels, and the history of the lands between is, in part, the history of the greater will trying to suppress those other voices. These other cosmic entities are called outer gods. The game identifies at least a half dozen of them with any clarity, and there are hints of others whose names and natures remain obscure. Each one has its own agenda, its own aesthetic, its own way of touching the world through chosen vessels. The god of scarlet rot is one of the most significant, described in the game as an ancient god of rot itself. This entity was defeated and sealed away in the depths beneath the lakes, trapped in what becomes the Lake of Rot, a vast underground body of scarlet corruption that will instantly kill you if you spend more than a few moments immersed in it. But sealed does not mean dead. The god of scarlet rot continues to exert its influence through chosen proxies, and the most significant of those proxies is Malenia, She was, according to the remembrance of the Rot goddess, marked by the god of rot from birth, its influence manifesting as the scarlet rot that has afflicted her since her first breath. If she blooms 3 times, if the scarlet Ionia flowers 3 times, she will become a true goddess, a complete vessel for the rot. She has bloomed once, in Caelid. She is not far from twice. The formless mother, also called the Mother of Truth, is the outer god that Mog, Lord of Blood, worships. She is associated with burning blood, with wounds, with a kind of brutal intimacy and suffering. When Morg stood before her in the deep earth, his cursed blood caught fire. Something about his nature as an omen, with the old crucible's traits burning in his blood, resonated with this deity in a way that sparked her interest. She chose him as her vassal. He built his palace around that wound in the world and called himself Lord of Blood. Mog is worth understanding because he is one of the game's most misunderstood figures. Misunderstood by the player and, more tragically, misunderstood by himself. He genuinely believed that what he had constructed in his hidden palace was a dynasty, a bloodline, a sacred project. He kidnapped Miquella believing he was doing the Empyrean a service, that together they would ascend to godhood, and Morg would finally have the recognition and the family that the world had denied him since the moment of his birth. He had been thrown in a sewer at birth. He had been told his existence was shameful, that the marks of the crucible on his body were signs of corruption rather than signs of something older and perhaps more honest than the Golden Order's carefully curated definitions of purity. He found, in the Formless Mother's theology of blood and wounds and truth, a system that accepted him, and he built a kingdom around that acceptance, however dark and twisted that kingdom became. When you reach Mogwyn Palace, through a hidden teleporter or through an Albinoric questline, the aesthetic is overwhelming, vast, blood-soaked, beautiful in the way that certain nightmares are beautiful. Everything is the colour of deep red and dark gold. The whole space feels like the inside of a wound. And Mug himself, when you finally meet him, is genuinely magnificent in his grotesque way. A god lord of blood who genuinely believes in his own vision, who declares his dynasty with the kind of absolute conviction that suggests he has had to convince himself of it every single day for a very long time. The fell god, the ancient fire deity of the giants, was the force that Marika and Godfrey went to war against in the early days of the Golden Order. A malformed, one-eyed deity with curled horns and braided red hair, associated with the primordial fire that preceded the Erd Tree's golden warmth. The giants served it. Their flame was its expression. And when Godfrey destroyed nearly all the giants, that deity lost most of its followers, but did not die. It lurks still in the mountain tops of the giants, in the last fire giant who tends the last cauldron, in the flame of ruin that the game requires you to light in order to burn the Erd Tree. And then there is the Frenzied Flame. The Frenzied Flame is the most directly dangerous outer god in the game, and also the most philosophically coherent in a disturbing way. Its theology, delivered through the 3 fingers, the counterpart to the Greater Will's 2 fingers, combining to suggest they were once part of a single whole, is essentially this. The Greater Will made a mistake by creating individuals. By fracturing the one great into separate beings, it introduced torment, affliction, despair. All sin, all suffering, all curse, born of that mistake. The solution is to melt it all away. to burn everything back to the one great, to return all things to the undifferentiated unity that preceded existence. This is nihilism dressed in cosmic language, and it is horrifying precisely because it is internally consistent. The frenzied flame's followers, scarred, mad-eyed people whose yellow irises burn with yellow fire, believe genuinely that the end of everything would be a mercy. And the most chilling version of this is the character of Vike, a Tarnished who was, according to item descriptions, closer to becoming Elden Lord than anyone before the player character. He was nearly there, nearly at the throne, and then he learned that his finger maiden, the woman who guides Tarnished on their journey, would have to be sacrificed to light the Forge of the Giants and burn the Erdtree open. He could not accept this. He descended into the depths beneath Leyndell, encountered the Three Fingers, and took the frenzied flame into himself to save her. He became a Lord of Frenzy. The throne receded, and he wandered into the madness. Ranni's chosen outer god, the Dark Moon, is the most hopeful of the alternatives, or at least the most aesthetic in its hope. Cold, silver, distant. The Dark Moon governs fate and stars and the unknown. It is not warm. It does not promise comfort or abundance, but it offers freedom from the greater will's structure, a different kind of guidance, one based on mystery rather than commandment. This is what Ranni chose. This is what she was working toward on the night of Black Knives and through everything that followed. All of these forces, the greater will, the god of rot, the formless mother, the fell god, the frenzied flame, the dark moon, and others whose names we barely know, are fighting a long, slow war for dominance over a world that only some of its inhabitants even know is a battlefield. Most people in the lands between simply live and pray, and die, and go back to the Erdtree without any awareness that the golden warmth they trust is one of at least 6 cosmic gambits being played around and through them. That is the horror at the heart of Elden Ring's theology. The gods are real. They are many, and none of them, not even the most benevolent seeming, cares about you in any personal sense. They care about their vision, their order, their triumph over other visions and orders. The individual human beings of the lands between are, to all of them, the material from which the future will be built. Not the architects, not the audience, the material. She spent decades preparing, perhaps longer. While the Shattering unfolded and her siblings fought and the world splintered around her, Ranni the Witch continued her patient Long Horizon project. She existed in her doll body, carried her soul through the ruins of a world she had helped break, and maintained her secrecy and her purpose with the kind of discipline that only someone who has already died and chosen to keep going anyway can sustain. Ranni is introduced to you, if you find her, in a tower in the north of Liurnia. 3 towers actually belonging to her and her brothers, relics of a Carian tradition, overlooking a landscape that was once her family's home, before her father Radagon left Rennala to return to Marika. She appears as a young woman with pale blue skin and silver hair, inhabiting a doll no larger than a child, surrounded by a small retinue of followers who are intensely loyal to her. Her wolf companion Bled, half man and half wolf, sworn to serve her. The blacksmith Iji, ancient and powerful. A snow witch named Seluvis, whose loyalty is more complex than it appears. She asks for your help. She wants to pursue the Dark Moon. She wants to find a key that will let her claim the power she needs, something called the Finger Slayer Blade, hidden in the depths of Nokron, the eternal city that fell from the sky when Radahn's gravity chains on the stars were broken and a meteor crashed into the world. Radahn's death was not merely a mercy killing at the festival. It was the trigger that allowed the stars to move again, which is why Ranni needed Radahn to die, which is why Malenia needed to fight him, which is why the Battle of Aeonia, whatever else it was, also served Ranni's purpose. The Fingerslayer blade, as the name suggests, was forged to kill the Fingers, those cosmic emissaries of the Greater Will. It was made in Nokron by people who had long ago rebelled against the Greater Will and been punished for it. Its existence says something remarkable about the depth and duration of resistance to the cosmic order. The Nox people of the Eternal Cities were, in their time, the most advanced scholars of the lands between. They studied stars. They communed with cosmic forces. They built underground cities of extraordinary beauty, lit by artificial constellations. And at some point, they used that scholarship to rebel, and the Greater Will punished them by literally burying their civilization underground, driving their whole world beneath the surface of the earth. The punishment was so thorough that most people in the lands between do not even know the underground cities exist. Ranni uses this blade, and then she disappears even deeper into her plan. She travels to the Moonlight Altar, a remote plateau where an ancient drake sleeps coiled around a cathedral of sorcery. She claims a special ring, a tiny, perfect ring meant for her, something that binds her to her Elden Lord, the one who will rule beside her in the new age she intends to create. She leaves that ring for you, asking you to find it and bring it back to her, asking you formally to be her lord and consort as you do so. The ring itself is a detail of heartbreaking delicacy. It is small, it is perfect. It has clearly been waiting a long time. And Ranni, who has been planning all of this for decades with cold strategic precision, cannot quite hide the particular quality of stillness that comes over her when you bring it back. She says very little. She takes the ring. And in that small contained moment, the human being underneath the centuries of planning and the porcelain doll body and the ancient cosmic conspiracy is briefly, quietly visible. The age of stars that Ranni envisions is, in her own words, one of unalloyed cold darkness. She speaks of guiding the lands between to a distant place, the stars, the cosmos, on 1,000-year voyage into darkness under the wisdom of the moon. The Erd Tree would no longer be the centre of power. The golden economy of souls flowing back to the parasitic tree would be disrupted. Instead, the dark moon would be the light that guides. Mortal, natural death would be restored in some form. The Greater Will's grip on the world would be broken. Is this a good ending? The game does not tell you. It is perhaps the most hopeful ending in the sense that it is the one most explicitly designed to break the cycle rather than perpetuate it. But cold darkness is still cold darkness. A 1,000-year voyage into the unknown is still an unknown. Ranni herself, for all her intelligence and her genuine concern for the world, is still aligned with an outer god that has its own motivations. Whether the Dark Moon is truly better for the people of the land between than the Greater Will, that is a question the game leaves open. What it is not is passive. Ranni took action in a world that crushed passivity. She orchestrated a conspiracy across decades. She paid for it with her life in flesh, if not in soul. She carried her purpose through grief and isolation, and the long weight of being the person who had to do something that no one else would. She is not a villain. She is not a hero. She is something more interesting than either. A person who looked at the world as it was and decided at profound personal cost to try to build a different one. One of the most remarkable things about Elden Ring as a piece of storytelling is that its most emotionally affecting moments are almost entirely optional. You can complete the game without ever meeting many of its most fascinating characters. You can reach the Elden Throne without knowing the name Alexander the Iron Fist, or understanding what Fia wanted, or following Nephili-Lu's quiet, determined arc from grief to governance. The main story is vast and cosmic, and often told in item descriptions and whispered dialogue, but the human story of the lands between is told in these smaller quest lines, and they are worth lingering on as the night grows deep. Alexander the Iron Fist is a giant jar, one of the living vessels called jarheads in community shorthand. Enormous clay pots filled with the remains of great warriors whose essence has been absorbed into the jar itself. Alexander is stuck in the ground when you first find him, wedged into the earth up to his shoulders, calling out cheerfully for help. He is immediately one of the most purely likable characters in the game. He wants to become stronger. He wants to absorb the remains of great warriors so that their power becomes part of him. He travels toward the Radon festival not out of duty or despair, but out of something almost like joy. The prospect of fighting in a great battle alongside great warriors excites him in the simple, honest way of someone who has found their purpose and is glad of it. His questline takes you across the entire world, meeting him at various points, watching him grow cracked and damaged from his battles, patching himself with putrid ash to keep himself together. At the end, you fight him. He requests it. He wants to be defeated by someone worthy so that his essence, everything he has absorbed and experienced and become, can be carried forward by you. It is, in its way, one of the most purely noble deaths in the game. A jar who wanted to be a warrior becoming, in his final moment, exactly that. Nephili-Lu is the granddaughter of Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, the leader of the Round Table Hold faction, the man who knows more about the lands between than almost anyone else, and uses that knowledge with cold, strategic care. But Nephili is nothing like Gideon. She is warm, forthright, deeply invested in justice in a way that her grandfather finds inconvenient. She is also, we learn, the adopted daughter of Hoarah-Lu himself, of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, who named her as his heir even in exile. Her questline involves her confronting the horror of what the lands between has done to the people of Stormvale, a village whose population was experimented on by Godric, turned into shambling creatures through grotesque grafting surgery. Nephili's response to discovering this is not political calculation. It is fury and grief. She has to be talked back from the edge of despair before she can accept the help she needs to finish what she came to do. When her questline resolves, when she sits on the throne of a restored Limgrave ruling as its lord, it is one of the few moments in the game that feels unambiguously like a good outcome. A small corner of the world governed with dignity by someone who earned it. Fia, the deathbed companion, has already been mentioned in the context of the Age of Duskborn ending, but her character deserves fuller attention. She sits in the Round Table Hold and offers to hold you, an embrace that gives you a small buff and a small debuff simultaneously, which is almost too perfect as a metaphor for what comfort costs. She is warm. She is gentle. She is also engaged in one of the most quietly ambitious projects in the game. She collects deathbeds, the moments of heroes' final rest, and carries them inside her body, using them to eventually create the Prince of Death that Godwyn's incomplete demise made possible. She's a woman with a theology of natural death in a world that forcibly removes it, who has devoted herself entirely to restoring what she believes is a fundamental right, the right to truly end. Her connection to Godwyn's lingering presence, her devotion to a being that is neither dead nor alive, neither conscious nor gone, is one of the game's strangest and most affecting stories. She loves something that cannot love her back in any conventional sense, and she continues anyway. Because the work is the work, and the cause is real regardless of what love can and cannot achieve. These questlines share a quality that defines the best of Elden Ring's storytelling. They do not resolve cleanly. Nephili's victory is real, but the world she governs is still broken. Alexander achieves his dream and asks to be ended in the moment of its fulfillment. Fia succeeds, but no one will ever fully understand what she accomplished. This is a world where the best outcomes are still tangled with loss, where achievement does not erase what it cost, where the people who make the world marginally better do so without fanfare and frequently without witnesses. The lands between is littered with people who tried and mostly succeeded and paid too high a price for it, and then were forgotten. Learning their stories, sitting with each one long enough to understand what they wanted and what they found, is, arguably, the real game. The bosses are the punctuation, the quest lines are the sentences. You arrive on a boat. The sea is grey and the fog is thick, and a voice is narrating your entrance into a broken world with words that are somehow both welcoming and ominous. You are Tarnished, a being who once had the grace of the Erd Tree, lost it at some point, died and endured the strange persistence that being tarnished grants, and has now received a call, a grace, a golden thread that pulls you toward the Erd Tree, that promises if you follow it far enough and survive long enough, you might restore the Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord. You do not know at the beginning that this is complicated. You learn quickly. The land between is not a world waiting to be saved. It is a world that has already been broken in ways that a single Tarnished, however powerful, cannot simply fix by fighting their way to the top. Every region you enter tells a different story about what the world lost and what it became in the losing. The ruins of Limgrave speak of a civilization that was once whole. The academy at Raya Lucaria speaks of a tradition of magical scholarship that continued stubbornly even as the world fell apart. Caelid speaks of a war that went so wrong it created an entirely new ecosystem of suffering. The underground eternal cities speak of peoples who were punished for the crime of ambition. The mountaintops of the giants speak of a genocide conducted in the name of order. And everywhere, you fight. You fight things that were once people. You fight things that were once great. You fight demigods who are monstrous not because they were born monstrous, but because the world made them so, or because the great runes pushed them into the worst versions of themselves, or because they had been waiting too long in a ruined world with nothing to do but become what their grief required. There is a woman named Malenia who walks beside you. She does not explain herself fully. The game is careful with her secrets. but she serves as a guide tending the sights of grace that serve as your checkpoints across the world, offering fragments of information and a kindness that seems genuine and is perhaps all the more touching for being unexplained. She has a goal of her own, which you will understand only at the end. She will sacrifice herself as kindling to burn open the Erd Tree so that you can enter it. She will burn for you, for the world. Who is Malenia? This is one of the game's most carefully guarded mysteries. She describes herself as someone who was born at the foot of the Erd Tree, given a purpose by her mother, and her mother is, by implication, Marika. She may be a child of Marika who exists outside the conventional lineages of demigod politics. She may be something stranger still, a soul given form by the Erd Tree itself, or a manifestation of something Marika created deliberately as a contingency. The game never tells you directly. What it tells you is this: she has no grace. She has no vessel except the temporary ones she chooses. She appears to you at sites of grace like a spirit of the between spaces, existing in the margins of the world rather than at its centre, and she is kind. She is the first genuinely kind presence you encounter in the lands between, and that kindness feels significant in a world where most things are trying to kill you. When she burns herself at the Forge of the Giants, the moment is one of the most visually arresting in the game. She stands in the fire, she speaks quietly, she tells you she does not know what she will become after this, but that she does not regret it. And then the Erd Tree opens, and you walk inside, and she is gone, or something like gone, or changed in ways that the base game does not fully resolve. Unless you have accepted the frenzied flame, in which case she will not do this, and she will become something else instead. A woman sworn to deliver you your destined death. Your journey takes you through all of it. Through every demigod and every ruin and every hidden underground city and every frozen mountaintop and every horrifying revelation. You consume great runes. You claim them from fallen demigods, carrying pieces of reality with you in increasingly uncomfortable ways, and eventually you make your way to Lendel, the royal capital, golden and ruined and beautiful and terrible all at once, and eventually, past all of that, to the Erd Tree itself, and to the final confrontation with what lives inside it. What lives inside the Erd Tree is Radagon, Marika's other self, Marika's devoted half, the part of the divine being that tried to repair what Marika broke. And when Radagon falls, he becomes Marika, and then he becomes the Elden Beast. The living embodiment of the Greater Will's order, the cosmic entity that was the Elden Ring, manifesting to defend the system from your challenge. You fight a creature of golden starlight in a void of absolute dark, and when it finally falls, the Elden Ring lies shattered around you, and Marika is there, fractured and silent, waiting to see what you will choose. The first ending, the Age of Fracture, is the simplest. You touch Marika and choose to mend the Elden Ring without any additional power or intention beyond the basic act. The Golden Order is restored. You become Elden Lord. The two fingers are satisfied. The Greater Will structure continues. The cycles continue. You have inherited a system as broken as it was before, but intact enough to function, which is perhaps the most honest description of most political restorations in any world. The second ending, the Age of Order, requires you to have followed the questline of two figures, Brother Corin, a priest who has lost his faith, and Goldmask, a silent philosopher who seeks the perfect expression of the Golden Order. Goldmask's revelation is that the flaws of the Golden Order stem from the fact that gods are as flawed as the mortals they govern. His mending rune creates a new structure, a transcendental golden order beyond the corruption of individual divine personalities. Cleaner, more rational. Whether that makes it better is genuinely uncertain. The third ending, the Age of Duskborn, comes from completing the questline of Fia, the deathbed companion, a woman who holds Tarnished in her embrace to share in their life force, and who has devoted herself to the cause of those who live wrongfully in death. Godwyn's death, incomplete as it was, produced something she calls the Death Prince, an entity that combines Godwyn's lingering flesh presence with the rune of death. Her mending rune restores natural death to the world. Those who live in death can finally rest. The cycle of the Erd Tree no longer captures and recycles every soul. It is a quieter ending, more melancholic than triumphant, and probably the most genuinely humane of the 4 Elden Lord options. The fourth ending, the Blessing of Despair, comes from the Dung Eater, one of the game's most deliberately repulsive characters, a man who has committed atrocities against the dead and living alike, who wants to spread his personal curse to all beings in the lands between, so that no one can be scorned because everyone will be equally defiled. His mending rune does exactly this. It is the worst of the Elden Lord endings, and it exists as the game's darkest possible answer to the question of what happens when someone with a completely nihilistic worldview is given the keys to reality. The fifth ending, the Lord of the Frenzied Flame, requires you to descend beneath Leyndell's sewers and find the 3 fingers and allow them to embrace you. This brands you with the Frenzied Flame, locks you into its path, and culminates in you becoming the Lord of Chaos, the instrument of the Frenzied Flame's apocalyptic vision. You ignite the Erd Tree not to open it, but to burn it, and everything else to ash. Malenia watches this happen, and vows to deliver you your destined death. There is something cosmic and terrible about the scale of this ending, but also something perversely clean about it. No more cycles, no more order, no more suffering, also no more anything. And the sixth ending, the Age of Stars, belongs to Ranni. If you have completed her quest line, if you have been her champion and her lord and have found her ring and carried it back to her, then after the Elden Beast falls, she is there. Not Marika's fractured form waiting to be mended, but Ranni's summon sign, offering you a choice. You summon her. She appears, enormous and divine in her true form, radiant and cold and utterly certain. She replaces Marika in the structure of the world. The dark moon becomes the guiding light, and she tells you that she will give birth to a new and fleeting world. She calls you her consort, and together you leave the lands between behind, travelling into the stars on that 1,000-year voyage she described, the world below beginning its first night without the golden light that has governed it since before living memory. It is an ending that manages to be both hopeful and frightening. You have broken the cycle. You have given the world something new, but you have left it behind in the process. And what will it become without even the imperfect governance of the greater will's order, governed instead by something cold and distant and ancient in a different way? This is the question the ending refuses to answer, and refuses to answer beautifully, because some questions should remain open. None of the 6 endings are happy in a simple sense. None of them provide the clean victory that the epic fantasy structure seems to promise and then withholds. All of them involve continuing something, a cycle, a new order, a destruction, a departure, rather than completing something. This is perhaps the most Miyazaki thing about all of it. The idea that endings are not endings but transitions, that nothing that matters ever truly stops. As the story settles around you, as these chapters close and the words slow and you drift toward whatever sleep or continued wakefulness is waiting for you tonight, I want to take a moment to sit with what Elden Ring is actually about. Because it is about many things. It is about a video game, obviously. A vast, beautiful, brutally challenging piece of interactive design that sold over 25 million copies and reminded the world that there is a massive hunger for stories that do not explain themselves, that trust their audience to piece together meaning from fragments and ruins and quiet devastation. But it is also about something that is not a video game at all. Elden Ring is about the systems we inherit, the structures that existed before we arrived, that claim authority over us based on an origin story we never witnessed, and a purpose we never consented to serve. The Erd Tree is golden, and it glows with something that looks like grace, and for most people in the lands, between most of the time it is easier to believe in the golden light than to question it, because questioning it is hard and costly, and the answers you find when you do question it are often horrifying. The Erd Tree is a parasite. The greater will is distant and different. The immortality it offers comes at the cost of your soul, returning to feed a cosmic machine that uses it for purposes you will never understand. But here is what is interesting about the people who do question it. Their alternatives are not obviously better. Ranni's cold moon is still a cosmic power with its own agenda. Miquella's compassion was real, but his methods were controlling and manipulative in ways that his goodness does not fully excuse. Goldmask's perfect order would remove the fickleness of gods, but might also remove the space for human unpredictability and freedom. The Frenzied Flame's solution to suffering is to end everything that can suffer. None of these is the answer you are hoping for when you start asking the question. This is where Elden Ring diverges from most epic fantasy in its treatment of power and redemption. Most epic fantasy assumes that if you can identify the corrupt system, you can replace it with a better one. The hero's journey ends with a new order that, if not perfect, is at least clearly superior to what came before. Elden Ring does not believe this. It believes that every order is also an imposition, every new god is also a new master, and the best you can hope for is to choose the imposition that aligns most closely with your values, knowing that your values are themselves the product of the systems that shaped you, and that the whole thing is turtles all the way down. What does this mean in practice? It means that the player's choice of ending is not a puzzle with a correct answer, but a genuine philosophical statement. When you choose the Age of Stars, you are saying something about your relationship to freedom and uncertainty and the willingness to leave behind the comfort of the familiar. When you choose the Age of Duskborn, you are saying something about the value of natural death and the harm of forced immortality. When you choose the Lord of the Frenzied Flame, if you choose it, knowing what you are choosing, you're saying something so dark and so honest about despair that the game treats it seriously rather than simply condemning it. Malena's vow to deliver you your destined death after that ending is not punishment exactly. It is accountability. It is the world insisting that even the most nihilistic act has a consequence that someone else must live with. But this is not a story of simple cynicism. Elden Ring is also about the people who tried. Marika, who built a world and eventually tried to break it open because she no longer believed in what it had become. Godfrey, who served with absolute commitment and was exiled for the crime of having run out of wars to fight. Miquella, who wanted to make the world gentler and was willing to do very cold things in pursuit of that warm vision. Malenia, who gave everything for her brother's cause and is still waiting for him to come back. Ranni, who died in their flesh to preserve the freedom of her soul. Fia, who held dying Tarnished in her arms because someone needed to. Morgott, who protected a city that had always despised him. Goldmask, who sat in silence at the edge of a great ruin and figured out the nature of the universe, and wrote nothing down because he believed the right person would understand without words. These are not the stories of heroes exactly. They are the stories of people who had impossible circumstances and tried in their various ways to do something meaningful within them, and they mostly failed. But the trying matters, the record of the trying matters. Even in a world where the Erdtree has forgotten you, even in a world where the golden light is a lie, the fact that Morgott stood guard over Leyndell's gate for all those years, that fact exists. It is real. It happened. There is something George R.R. Martin brings to this story that is unmistakable, which is the understanding that history is not made by the great events alone. It is made by individuals choosing, again and again, in the face of systems larger than themselves. And the fact that those choices rarely produce clean outcomes does not make them meaningless. It makes them human. And what does Miyazaki bring? The understanding that meaning is made from fragments, that the world is always already ruined by the time you arrive in it, and your job is not to restore some lost perfect state, but to figure out what you believe and act accordingly. You cannot fix the lands between. There is no option that fixes the lands between. What you can do is choose which direction you push the world in, and then live, or die, and return to life, and die again, with that choice. The message, if there is one, is not optimistic in any easy sense. You will never fully understand. The light has been broken for longer than anyone remembers. There are forces at play that you will never fully understand. The light you were guided by was not quite what it appeared to be. And in spite of all of that, or perhaps because of all of that, the choices you make still matter. They leave marks. They shape what comes next, even if you never see what comes next. Take a slow breath. You have travelled a long way tonight, through ancient civilizations and cosmic conspiracies and the falling stars of a world remade by the grief of gods. You have met Marika, and Godfrey, and Ranni, and Malenia, and Miquella, and Alexander, and Fia, and Nepheli, and the ghosts of 100 tragedies large and small. You have seen what golden light can hide, and what cold dark might offer instead, and all the complicated territory in between. There is one more thing worth holding before you sleep. The sights of grace, those golden wisps, those small pools of light where you rest and recover and level up. They are not simply game mechanics. Within the fiction, they are fragments of the Erdtree's fading grace. They are the world's memory of what it was supposed to be. And they point. Each one has a direction in which it leans, a golden indication of where you should go next, a soft suggestion from the system that you are on the right path. The game calls this guidance, and you can follow it and arrive at a throne, and make a choice. But you can also ignore it. You can wander. You can explore in directions the grace does not point. You can find the things the golden light is not drawing your attention toward. The underground cities, the hidden questlines, the optional bosses, the buried histories. Some of the most important truths in the lands between are not where the grace leads you. They are in the places the grace does not mention. The question the game asks quietly and persistently is not just what will you choose at the end, but how will you move through the world while you are getting there? Will you follow the light, or will you look at what surrounds it? That is a question that has an answer in the lands between. It also has an answer in your life. The systems that guide you, the lights that point, the structures that suggest a direction, the institutions that promise grace in exchange for compliance, they are not necessarily wrong, but they are not the whole picture. The whole picture requires wandering. It requires stopping when something catches your attention, even if the grace light is pointing somewhere else. It requires trusting that the detours are not distractions, but are sometimes the actual path. Elden Ring is a game that sold tens of millions of copies because people felt that. They felt playing it, the particular satisfaction of moving through a world that was genuinely full of things worth finding, that rewarded curiosity without punishing it, that made the detours as rich as the main road. And underneath the gameplay, underneath the bosses and the builds and the immunity discourse about which weapon is overpowered, underneath all of that, this story. This enormous, broken, beautiful, politically complex, cosmically terrifying, quietly human story about a world that was promised something golden and is still trying to figure out what it actually got. And now, wherever you are, whatever the hour, whatever is waiting for you on the other side of sleep, you can rest. If you found your way into sleep somewhere in the middle of this, I hope it was a dream worth having, and if you stayed awake through all of it, I hope the world feels a little larger and a little more interesting than it did when you arrived here tonight. The lands between will be waiting if you want to return. The stories will still be there, layered in the ruins, whispering from old item descriptions hidden in the cryptic gestures of dead NPCs. This has been Nightfall Lore. If tonight's journey meant something to you, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. It helps more than you know, and it lets me know that this kind of long, careful, immersive storytelling is worth continuing. And if there is a world you want to visit next, the lore of Dark Souls, or Bloodborne, or Sekiro, or something beyond games entirely, leave it in the comments. Every suggestion I receive becomes a possible future night. Sleep well. May grace find you. And if it does not, may you have the strength to find your own way through the dark.